I want to start with words of thanks. I do. I really want to start with a lot of thank yous. I think that's appropriate. First and foremost, I would like to thank the students for inviting me to speak. It's a big compliment and an honor, and I'm very touched. But more importantly than that, I want to thank the students themselves for coming to IMSA. And because the students have been thanking us a lot, and I think that they deserve, some appreciation. It's not easy to come to IMSA. It's really not. I mean, it's a strange place. The architecture is, distinctive. People won't give you a straight answer. If you ask a question, they respond with a question. They make you read Beowulf. They make you read Spinoza. It's not, the kind of place where you really immediately fit in. And the students add vibrancy and life. Yesterday, the sophomores and the juniors were mostly gone. The seniors were at Great America, obeying Newton's laws. And the school was empty. And it was like a tomb. I am used to a certain, atmosphere. Meloche sleeps under the table outside of my office. A dozen students are having tea with Miss Kane down the hall. And when the students are gone, the place loses its soul. And again, I want to point out that it's difficult to make the transition. And it's strange. I mean, it's strange when, if you want to see your boyfriend or girlfriend and you get an interviz, you have to go, you have to sit on opposite sides of the room, you can't make eye contact, each one of you has to be holding a math book. But in addition to the students, I want to thank the parents. And I really need to make this clear, because for me, up until recently, parenthood was an intellectual abstraction. It really was. I had parents, I did. They were wonderful, but they're gone. And I did not have children. And so I always looked at IMSA parents with admiration and respect, but not empathy, because I didn't have kids. And last year, my wife and I adopted a little 10-year-old girl. And now I have kids. And I have become, oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Not for my wife, because she does everything. I just want to point something out. I have become a nervous wreck. I was never a nervous wreck. I was sophisticated. I lived in the city. I went to ballet on the weekends. I drank martinis. And now I worry about my kids' fractions and timetables. My kid just joined softball, and she cannot play softball. She's never played before. She tries so hard. She couldn't hit water if she fell out of a boat. She's terrible. And she's not here tonight, and so I can say that. If she was here, I would have just put her in for major therapy. And so I really appreciate what it takes to send your students to the Illinois Math and Science Academy and trust us with your kids. I mean, I know they're a lot of work, I know they're a little wired, but they are wonderful students. And it takes a lot to, leave your students behind. I have watched people leave their kids behind on the first day of IMSA for 18 years. I've been here for 18 years. 5% of the parents have a brief kind of fist-pumping happiness. But the rest walk out with this feeling of kind of great guilt. I've abandoned my baby. And it's a real act of bravery. If you go to VIP Day, when you meet the faculty, and you meet Claiborne Skinner, and you still send your kid to IMSA, that is a lot of courage. I adore Claiborne Skinner. I would give him a kidney if he needed one, but the man is strange. And you don't just trust your children to someone wild-eyed, the strange prophet from the Old Testament. And so I want to thank you, the students. I want to thank the parents. I want to thank you for, if you'd like, entrusting us with your kids so that we could have, the experience we have with them. All right. This is a graduation speech, and one of the students just said, Kiely, are you going to give us more advice? Because graduation speeches are all about advice. Yes, I'm going to give you more advice. So I was trying to come up with a way to make advice interesting, and I decided the best way to make advice interesting is to put it in the context of Bronze Age biblical passages that threaten the destruction of cities. And so I have a quote for you from an obscure book of the Judeo-Christian Bible. I'm not a preacher, but it's always nice to start a speech this way. The quote is from the book of Nahum, the 2nd chapter, the 13th verse. And the sword shall devour thy young lions. Now, let me give you a little context, because that's not very cheerful. Nahum is the shortest book in the Judeo-Christian Bible. It's 2.5 pages, 3 chapters. The ancient Israelites were conquered by the Assyrians. The Assyrians are a very fierce people. They rule over the Middle East for the better part of 6 centuries. And in the 7th century, they are conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And their capital city of Nineveh is destroyed and laid to dust. And Nahum is an Israelite subject of the Assyrians, and he's delighted to see them go. And the entire book of Nahum is, the Assyrians are dead, and we're very happy about this. And so he goes on to say that the Lord has devoured the young lions of the Assyrians. And by that, he means the fierce young warriors of the Assyrians. And he writes it in a negative tone. Apparently, losing your young lions is a bad thing. And so I want to speak about what it means to be a young lion. And I think we should break it up into 2 components. A, young. And B, lions. So let's talk about being young. Now, you can ask, Kiely, you are not young. I am not young. I was young once. I had hair. I was adorable. But I'm not anymore. And the students are young. And you can tell because they have that glowy skin. You know, they pull their skin out, it snaps back. If I pull my skin out, it stays there. But sometimes I think in this world, in this context, in this institution, youth suffers a bit. And so I want to speak a little bit about preserving your youth as you go forward into college. First, I want to talk about hope. Because hope is the characteristic virtue of youth. You know, hope for the future is the great glory of young men and women. And I think hope has taken a beating over the last 10 years. We live in an age where people, I think, are hypercritical. If you post something on the internet and you come back the next day, there are 15 negative responses. If you read Amazon.com, you can't enjoy a book without 15 negative reviews. We have lived through collapsing banks and recessions and melting glaciers and homeless, polar bears and 2 wars. And I think that students are, confronted with, if you'd like, the realities that they face. And I think that maybe hope is something that is threatened. And I just want to stress that in the end, hope is part of being young. That idea of being dedicated to a better world. The idea of being naive. You are young, you have the right to be naive. You have the rest of your life to be critical and cynical. I'm not telling you to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Uninformed. But you can combine, if you like, intellectual rigor with, if you like, lightness of heart. And so hope, and don't be ashamed of it, and do not tolerate those who would rain on it. Secondly, and I'm very aware of this, IMSA, as I said, is a hard place to study. You show up, and immediately you are ignited, and people are putting the human race on your shoulders. You're 16 years old, and you have to better the human condition. When I was 16 years old, I was trying to learn how to swim. And you have to better the human condition. You do internships, where I worked in movie theaters and ripped tickets. You do research. You have inquiry projects. And sometimes, I think that we ask you to grow up a little too soon. I think that you are so concerned with achievement. I think you are so concerned with the goal that you forget, if you like, the road along the way. And the road along the way is the glory of life. I mean, IMSA really stands for, Illinois makes students anxious. And so I want to tell you a story about failing to see the trees, for the sake of the forest. When I was 27, I had a grant to go to London. I was actually studying in the British Library. I was doing research for my dissertation. And I had never been to Europe before. I'm a European historian, and I had never been. And to be sure, I noticed the various European things. But I was so focused on my work. I went to the British Library every morning. This is when the British Library was still in the British Museum on Great Russell Street. Since then, it has moved to King's Cross. But this is the original British Library built in the 19th century, that magnificent blue dome where Darwin wrote The Origin of Species and Marx wrote Das Kapital, and it was filled with ghosts, and it was filled with atmosphere. And I marched right by the ghosts and the atmosphere every day, and I went to the rare book room, and I got my books. You know, my special rare books. The History of Generation by Nathaniel Highmore, 1651. I worked through that for my 3rd chapter. And because I used it every day, they would put it on the ready-to-call rack. And next to me, at a adjoining carrel, there was this nice fellow. He was about 6'3". He had red curly hair and one of those honest faces that you just love. And one day, I showed up, and he had my book. I want to point out, when you're working on your dissertation, you need to produce novelty. And if someone has your book, they are trespassing on your novelty. What if he writes my chapter first? What if he comes up with the interpretations that I was going to come up with? How can I get that book? I know, I'll kill him. How do you kill someone in Great Britain? You make them eat the food. And thoughts of slow homicide drifted through my mind as I watched him work on my book. And I went to the snack bar, and he came up behind me, and I looked for a knife. But they only had butter knives. You can't spread someone to death in the British Library. And he tapped me on the back. My enemy, my foe, tapped me on the back. He wanted to talk. He wanted to chide me with discoveries that he made and I didn't. And he said, I've watched you read that book every day for 2 weeks, and you really seem to enjoy it. And so I wanted to have a look at it, and it's really fascinating. You're a really lucky guy. And I felt like a prize jackass. And after that, I took time to go to the Tower of London and look at the things in the British Museum on the way to the reading room. Back then, the Rosetta Stone was not behind glass. You just walked by it. You could even touch it. I didn't. People did. That's why it's behind glass now. You know, you walked by the manuscripts of Chaucer and Shakespeare. You walked by the letters of Jane Austen and Alexander Fleming. And so I learned a little bit about caring less about where you're going and caring more about where you are. And that's part of being young. Part 2, lions. To talk about lions. I don't mean real lions. If you study biology, you will learn that animals, in all of their Darwinian splendor, are fairly, what's the word I'm looking for, uninspiring as graduation, role models. They're kind of cruel. And I don't mean Disney lions. I don't mean lions that sing musical numbers and eat bugs. I mean medieval heraldic lions. I mean the lions you see on the shield of the King of England. The red lion of Scotland on its hind paws, with its front paws rampant, fighting the good fight. Because when I think about lions, I think about bravery. We don't talk about bravery that much. We talk about achievement, and we talk about determination, and we talk about following your dreams. But I want to talk about bravery. Specifically, the bravery it takes to fight well. Again, victory is important, but how you fight the fight is more important. How many people here have seen Lord of the Rings? Think about my favorite character in The Lord of the Rings is Boromir, because he's wonderfully flawed. And then he falls, he does something terrible. And then he picks himself up and fights well, and he dies in the process. But because he fights well, he loses, but he fights well. And in the act of fighting well, he redeems himself. And so you have to ask yourself what it means to be honest and forthright, to attack from the front, to let your opponents know that you're coming, and to, if you'd like, pay attention to how you achieve what you achieve. And again, I want to tell you a story. I was born in 1962. When I was 9 years old, the Republicans broke into Democratic campaign headquarters in the Watergate Hotel. And my father was in denial. My father was a drill sergeant in the Army, and then he became the regional manager for Elizabeth Arden Cosmetics. It's a real interesting life's journey. And my father was a registered member of the New York Conservative Party because he thought the Republican Party was a dangerous left-wing plot to undermine the Constitution. My father was scary conservative. He was brilliant, he was intelligent, and very, very conservative. And I remember when Watergate took place, I asked him what happened. He sat down and he said, some bad people are trying to trap the president. He meant Nixon. He loved Nixon. And over the course of the Watergate investigations, I saw my father get disillusioned with Richard Nixon. The lying and the cover-ups and the fact that he didn't pay his taxes, that bothered my father more than anything. And one day my father sat down and said, you know, if the day after Watergate, Richard Nixon had gone on television and said, some of my campaign workers were a little too zealous and they broke the rules, and I am completely responsible. And I hope you will not hold it against me and my party in November. But that's what happened. My father was convinced that Nixon would have won in the landslide, honestly, as opposed to dishonestly. And he wouldn't have been disgraced. And so that notion of playing by the rules, of fighting the good fight, of fighting well, and if you make a mistake, admit it. I can't tell you how refreshing it is. The people I work for are sitting down there. I make mistakes all the time. I haven't been on time for work since 1983. You know, what happened? I made a mistake. Okay. And so, you know, there was a movie called Chariots of Fire about runners in the 1924 Olympics. And one of them is a young Scotsman, and he's trying to explain to his sister why he runs. And he doesn't run to win medals. He says he runs because when he runs, he feels God's pleasure. Now, you might not be religious, but the idea of taking joy in doing. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells to Arjuna that you do your duty for the sake of the duty, not for the sake of the reward. So, victory is sweet. I've won some. It's awesome. You have that great, you know, I am wicked bad kind of feeling. But it's fleeting. But people will never forget the fact that you stood your ground with honor. Okay. On the lighter side, I think we need to talk about some practical things because you're going to college, and I promise I will let Ms. King speak. First of all, get some sleep. For God's sake, get some sleep. All of you. But not on the floor. Sleep on horizontal furniture. Poor Malo sleeps under the table. He sleeps on the couch in my office once in a while. It's a love seat. He's curled up there like a fetus. Milosh, get a bed. Get used to working on Wednesdays. You know, the rest of the world works on Wednesday. If you guys have to work on a Wednesday, by Friday you're all walking around like you just got a shot of Novocaine. Wednesday is a work day. Now, I know that some of you go to SIR, it's a lot of work, but most of you, if you have to work 5 days, by Friday you riot. Get used to a 5-day week. Use fabric softener. I know that's a strange thing to say, but it changes your life. I never used fabric softener until I got married, and women introduce you to fabric softener, and I just feel wonderful right now. Be an engineer, or make friends with engineers, or marry engineers. They know how to make things work. It's amazing. I lived with an electrical engineer in college. The TV broke. I'm a Renaissance historian. As far as I'm concerned, the TV works because there's a witch in it. TV broke. The witch is dead. Now they have thin screen TVs, so they're really skinny witches. The TV broke. He opened up the back of it. He went to a store and bought and he put it in, and the TV worked. I was impressed. Find engineers. Marry engineers. Love engineers. Avoid credit cards. They're evil. Let's see. Tell the truth. Share your stuff. Give flowers to strangers. I met my wife that way. Bet on long shots once in a while. Call your mother. Phil said this. Call your mother. She gave you life. Avoid Krispy Kremes. They're poisonous. Mr. Lawrence once set off the fire alarm by burning a burrito in a calorimeter. Remember? Krispy Kremes are worse. And always remember, in the classroom, in the boardroom, in the operating room, always live a life filled with hope. And always fight the good fight. Stand your ground. Fight well. Be our young lions. Thank you very much.